Hi, everyone.
Same problems.
I know people are, this is hot.
This
This is a lot. I know people are, let's keep the balance. People are still trickling in, and I know there are a lot of classes tonight, so there may be people in and out, but we will accommodate the flow and the experiment. But thank you all so much for being here. They are not introducing me, so I will introduce myself. Thanks, Lindsay. My name is Ian Daniel. I'm a mid-career MPA student here. I also do other things with anti-racist policy on campus for the Journal and the caucus that we just started. I have a background in media. I've made a television show called Gaycation about LGBT issues around the world, mainly focusing on policy, but also just very personal stories. And that was on Vice a few years ago. I think you can find that ripped online places. And then I made another film as a director and producer called There's Something in the Water about environmental racism in Canada and Indigenous and Black communities that were being poisoned by toxic industries. And I came to Harvard to learn more about policy because I was making documentary work around that. And here I am. I'm sorry, I ate chicken and now it's in my teeth. Classy. Yeah, so thank you all for coming. I just wanted to say a big thank you to the Shorenstein Center Media, Politics, and Public Policy for hosting this event. And we have partners. Thank you to the Ash Center, the Harvard College Office of BGLTQ Student Life, the Anti-Racism Policy Caucus, the HKS Alumni Pride Caucus, and the Harvard the Harvard Gender and Sexuality Caucus, and the LGBTQ Caucus. Caucus Unite. And I want to thank all the people that are joining us online as well. And this is being recorded, just so you're aware of any privacy issues. Tonight, we're here to discuss LGBTQIA+ representation in the media to kick off Transgender Awareness Week, and really here to celebrate the accomplishments of transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive people while raising awareness on the bills, policies, structural racism, transphobia, and violence that affects the LGBTQIA+ community locally, internationally. And I'd like to discuss too how we can all create create a larger community of resistance and care. Let me introduce some of my panelists here, and we'll go from there. Chastity Bowick, her, is currently the executive director of the Transgender Emergency Fund of Massachusetts, the leading crisis agency for transgender communities here, and the only organization dedicated to supporting low-income and unhoused transgender individuals. Ooh. Skylar Balar, him, is the first transgender athlete to compete in any sort of an NCAA Division I men's team. By 15, he was one of the nation's top 20 15-year-old breaststrokers. And by 17, he set a national age group record. In college, he swam for Harvard University on Harvard's winningest teams. In 50 years, Skylar made a difficult choice to transition while potentially giving up the prospect of being an NCAA champion, which was historic. And he's an advocate on social media that's quite impactful and was named LGBTQ Nation's Instagram advocate for 2020. Yes, Amir Ashur, he started and was the executive director of Ira Queer, Iraq's first national LGBTQ+ organization whose mission is to empower Iraqi LGBTQ individuals through raising awareness in Iraqi society and to advocate for LGBTQ+ rights in Iraq. And he's currently pursuing a law degree at Harvard Law School. Hi. Thank you all so much for being here. Let me give you a little context. So, hi. Come in. So we know that stigma against LGBTQ+ and Two-Spirit people creates long-term impacts on mental health and economic and housing stability. According to 2021 Gallup poll, 68% of Americans believe that they have never personally met anyone who's transgender. So meaning the majority of the public's education and awareness about transgender people has been informed by the media, which has overwhelmingly misrepresented and mischaracterized who trans people are, and has a significant influence on public perceptions, policies, and attitudes. And on one hand, there's been exceptional growth in the past several years, access to rights and representation, The growing visibility of authentic media portrayals has led to policy changes that have brought greater, greater equity. And more, we are seeing transgender people run for office and win government positions. However, unfortunately, as the visibility grows, we also see coordinated anti-transgender backlash launched in an attempt to stop this growing acceptance. We see bigoted rhetoric and baseless legislation, disinformation campaigns targeting trans people and gender expansive youth, especially. Overall, more than 300 anti-LGBTQ bills have been proposed in 2022, according to the Human Rights Campaign. Those restrict healthcare for trans people, keep trans youth from participating in sports, and they're censoring books in our classrooms. I'm speaking about America here, but we will talk about the global context tonight as well. Transgender Awareness Week is observed from the 13th to the 19th. It's 1 week of celebration leading up to Transgender Day of Remembrance, which memorializes victims of transphobic violence. And then sadly, 2022 has already seen at least 32 transgender people fatally shot or killed by other violent means, or killed by violent means. And I say at least because these are stories that often go unreported or misreported. And the majority were Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people. And globally, we've seen 375 transgender people were killed in 2021, making it the deadliest year of violence against gender diverse people. And we're also seeing this right here at Harvard. There was a death threat sent out to the school in the summer that was targeted toward LGBTQ people. And also today, I want to say that we mourn and honor our fellow HKS classmate and activist Rodrigo Ventesilla, who was recently killed in an act of anti-trans violence while in police custody in Indonesia. And this Friday on Trans Day of Remembrance at 12:30 p.m. at Belinda Hall at HKS, there'll be a moment of silence for Rodrigo, and I would really appreciate if y'all could be there. So today we'll discuss these narratives and ways that allies and accomplices here tonight can take action in the fight for LGBTQ rights. So we'll talk for about 30 or 40 minutes and then we'll open it up to Q&A. All right. On the note of visibility, let me get my questions here. So yeah, I think let's start it off by talking about representation in the media. And I wanted to know from maybe all of your perspectives how you see LGBT representation in the media affect your daily lives, either negatively or positively, and how do you see that impacting policy decisions? And also maybe talk more about your personal work raising awareness for LGBTQ plus people. Would you like to start, Chastity?
Thank you, Dan. For me, I feel as though transgender representation in the media has been more harmful to my community than good. People take what they see on TV, whether it's a movie or a show, and they assume that is exactly how we live. So they assume that we all are sex workers or strippers on the low or things of that nature. And so when they see us in the street and try to interact with us, they act as if we are that individual on TV. Or you have someone who, maybe newly transitioned, but is famous and uses that platform to try to speak for the entire community when you have no substance to do so. But you're giving your audience and your millions of followers the idea of, oh, okay, so wait, trans people are just using Social Security or trans people are just using this because you haven't had to be homeless before. You don't know what it's like to have to sell your body for your next meal or for somewhere to sleep. So I think it does a disservice to our community members. We need more advocates to be on TV, to be speaking on day-to-day issues, like the things that go on at the Transgender Diversity Fund about people getting attacked by family members and sleeping in hallways right here in Boston, but we're not important enough to make the news. So I think it's important that people be cautious of what they see on TV and what you take away from it. And myself, even, locally being on the news here and trying to advocate for my community, it comes with a great deal of backlash. Then I'm getting emails and messages on social media. Oh, how much is it for an hour? Or trying to just use my past against me or thinking I'm still my past. And so some of us, we push through and still put ourselves out there because it's important to educate people on the real day-to-day of our livelihoods, especially transgender folks of color.
Sure.
Yeah, only one mic.
It's always a hot potato for the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to highlight what Chastity has said. I think that the media has a way of polarizing views of people, and it can only show so much. And I don't think any sort of media representation is correct for lots of different people, but the less you have, the less accurate it becomes, right? Because it's just one image. And I think that especially for transgender people, especially for trans people of color, especially for Black trans people, Black trans femmes, I think we get, farther into marginalization, we get farther into stigmatizing and harmful stereotypes. I do think that we've seen more representation recently, and I think that's been productive to a degree, and the degree is bringing transness to the vernacular. That's the only degree I will say. It says, hey, this is a thing that exists. Hi, trans people exist, right? I think that's productive to a very small degree. And the second part that is sort of falls right behind that is that trans youth are watching and seeing that trans people exist, and they say, that might be me, right? I also think that can be productive. Neither of those things affected me because I didn't watch TV as a kid. So I wasn't exposed to a lot of those sort of messages. But I think in general, for me, I found the media, like I actually, this is sort of, I don't know, maybe a strange fact, but I refuse to watch any show that has a trans person in it, or a trans character in it. And it's not because I don't want to support my friends who are the actors. It's not because I don't, support the concept of having trans people in media, but it's because usually it's wrong. It's not done well. And it's so uncomfortable for me to watch that I don't even want to interface with it. So I don't know if it's changed. It's been a couple of years since I've watched trans people on TV shows, in fictional TV shows, because it just doesn't bring a whole lot to my life. I think that's as honest as I can be about it. In terms of my own sort of, I guess, work in the media, if you will, I've just tried to be my own representation as much as possible, as well as providing a representation that isn't there. I've tried very hard to create as much resources for trans people and for cis people to watch trans people existing online that's as intersectional as possible. And so many people come up to me and be like, well, I knew trans people existed, but I've never seen an Asian American trans person, or I've never seen, a trans athlete, or I've never seen one part of my identity. And so I've tried to be like, well, here I am. Here I am existing, and it can be very, very lonely. And at the same time, the same thing is true where I cannot possibly represent the whole community, but I am essentially demanded to. And I think any person of a marginalized community feels that when they are in a space surrounded by the dominant, quote unquote, dominant communities, because we are sometimes the only person of the marginalized group that somebody else is interfacing with. And so we're sort of like the diplomat, if you will, or we're being forced into that. And that's a very complicated place to be in. I'm almost always, or I'm many people's first trans person they've met, and I feel a huge responsibility in those moments to be this ambassador, but I can't be, but I have to be, but I can't be. It's a really strange tension to be in. And I feel like I carry that often. And it's why I'm so glad to have other trans people on panels with me when I don't have to be the only person. We can be two people. So yeah.
Do you want to use that mic or do you want this one?
Yeah, so I wish a trans Iraqi person was here, but sadly that's not possible. It's not always possible to have an Iraqi queer person, no matter what part of the queer community they belong to. That being said, I've worked with the queer movement in Iraq since 2011. I think one of the biggest problems we have in Iraq is the fact that even the language, both Arabic and Kurdish, the two main languages used in Iraq, do not have LGBT plus neutral terms. So we're often referred to as, deviants or immoral or mentally ill. So a lot of the work that we've done was just to introduce neutral terminology in Arabic and Kurdish. So we actually can have a civilized conversation rather than, starting a show that says, tonight's show, we'll talk about this deviant community. How do you even start, pushing back against something that starts with that kind of terminology? And then on top of that, they add haunted house kind of music when queer people talk about their stories to basically tell the viewers, this is how you should feel. This is a dangerous community. You should be fighting against it because it's a threat to Iraqi society. So for us, it's not about deciding whether the representation, we can relate to it or not. it's an attack, it's not representation. The murders of trans people and other queer individuals, the physical attacks that we face are not really reported. A trans woman, for example, was killed in May by her brother, and the brother is yet to be detained and held accountable. But this is not something only specific to murders against trans people. It's something that is very accepted in crimes committed against LGBT plus people. So I think the conversation for us is even further behind than it is for everyone here. Not to minimize the huge impact that it has, but it almost feels like I'm in two parallel universes at the same time.
Yeah, I think let's talk more about policies and how you're seeing the backlash play out in your personal lives. So Chastity, you were talking about sort of how politicians use the trans community as a prop, or when it's time to vote or elections are coming up, they whisk into the neighborhood, take photos, and then they don't really pass any bills or give any funding. And can you talk more about your experience with that? And maybe everyone has an experience just with politicians.
Yes, it's very frustrating to say the least. Our current White House administration, had a lot to say when they were running for office about protecting Black trans women and providing more resources for trans youth, and that hasn't been the case. So that's just a prime example of them using our name and our likelihood, but at the same time, they're not, once they get in office, we're kicked to the bottom of the barrel, like not even a thought. And to further that example, the previous White House administration, the Trans Emergency Fund, and a host of other LGBTQ organizations sued the previous White House administration for the 1557 rule, which they were trying to make a law that would allow insurance companies and private doctors to discriminate against trans patients when it comes to gender affirming services. And so to put that in pause, we sued them with the help of the National Women's Law Center in Washington, D.C. And when you would think this new White House administration would come in and fix things right away, that was not the case. We're still in this battle. It's been paused because the judge had it paused, but this should have been an easy fix. You care about us so much that you said in your campaign, you could have just went in and fixed it so that they can't discriminate against us when it comes to the service that we require. And so that is what I mean when I say that they just use us as a token. And the same thing here in Massachusetts. People think that, oh, Massachusetts, you have these rights and trans people should be lucky in Massachusetts. Absolutely not. We shouldn't be lucky to have equal rights. We shouldn't be lucky to have public accommodations. But I don't feel lucky because I know that my trans people in North Carolina and Arkansas don't have those rights. And so till we all have the same rights across this country and beyond, then I don't feel like our political system is doing the transgender and LGBTQ communities any type of justice. And I know that I am making sure that I'm holding our officials here in Massachusetts accountable with our new governor that will be coming in. Since she's been a supporter of the trans community, I'm gonna make sure to hold her to that. And to Boston's current new mayor, Michelle Wu, I'm continuing to make sure I hold her office accountable because you use the Trans Emergency Fund name throughout your whole campaign. You can Google it and see it. You can look it up, see how many times she said our name. So I want to make sure that your office is doing everything that you can to protect the rights of the transgender people in your city when it comes to housing, employment, and social services. And so I think we need to, when you see these politicians using LGBTQ people for a props during their campaign, remember it, document it, because we need to hold these people accountable.
Thank you, yeah. Skylar, I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of propaganda, fear mongering that's happening on social media, and just how you're using social media to really bring awareness with your TikTok and Instagram and tutorials, which has really been quite effective. So kind of talk about the negative and positive experience with social media.
Yeah. I mean, I think Chastity's spot on, right? They use us as a prop for gaining political power, and they also use us to be denigrated for gaining political power. And I want to just start with the fact that we have to remember, yes, trans people are a significant part of the population, but we're also like 1% of the population. And the fact that everybody's panicking about trans people, you really have to put it in perspective for a second. So let's just do trans people in sports, because everybody has heard about that. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard about trans people in sports, right? Or the trans swimmer, right? Which is not me. It would be Leah Thomas, who is a trans woman who swam at UPenn. The world panicked about her, and it sort of people, especially the anti-trans legislation, people really use that as a sort of lightning rod issue to push forward more anti-trans sports bans. And it just was really fascinating to watch this happen. Devastating as well, but the fascination was there was several states where they had like 3 trans athletes in the entire state. Right. So, for example, Utah, the Utah governor would very surprisingly vetoed the bill that was going to ban trans girls from competing in sports. Why? He said it all came down to numbers. There's 75,000 high school athletes in Utah. One was a trans girl in girls athletics. Right. And the world, I want you to think about this. If we are all panicking about 5, 1, 10, let's say it's 100, right? Trans people who are in sports or in healthcare or what have you. There's a whole lot more money that's going into trying to ban us from places than it has ever cost us to exist. So just from like a general business perspective, but beyond that, why are they doing that, right? Because it actually is beneficial to them. It's beneficial to their causes. And the reason is because they're scrambling for power by putting us down. We are very quick and sort of simple to some degree, a wedge issue for them to use to split the population, right? And the sort of most genius and really evilly genius thing that they're doing is they're perverting feminism to do it. They're trying to get people to believe that it's feminist to exclude trans people and to specifically exclude trans women. And how do they, well, you say, okay, well, how is this feminist? Well, they're saying, oh, well, we need to protect women. That's a whole argument about sports, right? Protect women, of course, not trans women. So they're clearly being directly transphobic there. But the problem is when you exclude trans women, you actually have to define womanhood. When you do that, you have to reduce women to their reproductive capacity, which is pretty much the opposite of feminism. And people don't see that. And when we police the women's category in any way, shape, or form, we're actually policing all women in that category, which again is the total opposite of feminism. So if we can pick apart we can do this with any one of the issues, right? When we come down to bathrooms, which is again demonizing trans women in order to then, say that trans women shouldn't be allowed in bathrooms because then men are going to. So all this is the problem. When we come down to who are we afraid of? Are we afraid of a trans woman doing something wrong? No, we're actually afraid that men are going to pretend to be women to win sports, to gain access to women in bathrooms. So who are we afraid of? We're afraid of toxic cis men. So all of this is punishing trans people at the expense, right? Or sorry, punishing trans people because of men, because of cis men, which is the most opposite of feminism possible. So why is this happening? It's because the people who are in power are finally seeing people who are marginalized taking power, saying actually, hey, we know ourselves, we can organize, we can actually get together and say, we don't deserve this, and we're actually more than this. And that's terrifying to the people in power. And so they are scrambling and using us as a wedge issue to try to take that power back. But anybody who's not a white, cis, straight man who also is like relatively well off is at risk right now. And people don't see that. And that's the whole point. They're trying to fracture us. So there's a lot there. I'm talking too long, so I think of your mics, I'll be quiet now.
No, I'm here for it. Yeah, no, there's a lot to discuss, and so don't worry. Amir, also maybe speak about just the work you've been doing in the law, but also in terms of online awareness that Queer was doing, how that's impacted the community.
Yeah, so I think, when you work in a context like Iraq, you have to think of the huge gap in information as an opportunity, because anything you do will help fill that gap and try to educate the public about what's actually happening. So we've done radio programs. We continue to do radio programs that are broadcasted from inside Iraq. We've done a number of videos, including animation videos, reaching hundreds of thousands of people, all using local languages, using the terminology that we've developed. And even though the attitudes that are portrayed by the media against LGBT+ people are still negative, they are increasingly using the proper terminology when referring to LGBT+ individuals. That being said, specifically when it comes to trans people, one of the biggest problems we face is the fact that transitioning is not legal in Iraq. It's not illegal, just the same as being queer in Iraq is not actually a crime, but it's also not protected by the law. But legal and social practices criminalize queerness in general, including being trans. So when people decide that they will go through hormonal treatments, for example, which are often obtained not through the health care system, they are facing a lot of risks because they are not done under medical supervision. And when they start showing physical changes that, in the eyes of law enforcement, for example, does not align with your legal identities, then they are often the target of sexual assault, of physical violence, and murders too. Um, so one of the things that we've been trying to do is to just focus on the right to life, because it's something that is, first of all, so basic. If you're not alive, you can't advocate for anything else. Your education and employment doesn't matter if you're dead. And the second part is the fact that even if you're a fundamentalist, very conservative religious believer, you believe in the value of life. So this is something maybe we have in common. And once we are at a point where people are not afraid for their lives when they speak up against certain violations, then we can have a real debate where queer people from all the groups can join the table and speak up. The local or the domestic advocacy is a lot slower than we want it to be, because even the few politicians who are supportive of queer rights in Iraq are not able to be public. But internationally, 2 years ago, we were able to have Iraq recognize the right to life of LGBT plus people at the UN, but they're yet to translate that public statement into actual protection inside Iraq.
Oh, there's so much to talk about that we're barely going to be able to scratch the surface. So, but I do want to focus on obviously yeah, there are a lot of painful stories here. There's a lot of tragedy, as we know, and I also really want to focus on joy and what we can all do as well. And so I think there'll be a lot of people in here who want to be better allies or accomplices, and a lot of people who are going to be politicians or work in policy now. So I think it'd be great if everyone can kind of share what you think people can do to support the LGBTQ community, specifically the trans community, how they can get involved to learn more and do more.
I feel like I've started the last few questions.
Right, yeah,
so
so
who
yeah,
wants to go?
Yeah.
Gosh, what can you all do? I mean, I think so. There's so many different levels of allyship that are important, and I think that a lot of times we think in really big, sweeping sort of statements or actions, like, okay, I need to go and change this law. I need to go and have this politician elected, or this law fixed, or have that judge fix the I'm sorry, the court case. I'm not speaking in real words right now. Those are all great, and if you can do that, great, do them. But if you can't, having a conversation with your transphobic friend, hopefully you're not your friend, but your transphobic person that's near you, you're a transphobic uncle, your transphobic dad, your transphobic whoever, that is powerful, because when that happens and that cascades forwards, we're creating these small sort of like dots that then sort of leak outwards, right? And you can affect change that way. Society is made up of people and of relationships. And so if you can affect change with just the person next to you, or the person, who's I don't know, classmate or what have you, that actually can change. And I've seen that happen in just like the work that I do, because a lot of the work I do is not actually policy work. I don't understand a whole lot of policy stuff. I'll be honest with you all. But my skills are interpersonal. And so I give talks and speeches and give trainings that are mostly just dependent on interpersonal relationships. And I'm good at that. And people change. I've had so many people come up to me and say, wow, I never thought about this way because of the way you shared that story. And now I can connect with you. Now I don't want this trans person that I just randomly meet on the street to have such a terrible experience. And because I've seen the humanity in you. And it's very beautiful. It's also devastating. We should all see the humanity in other people without having to be handed other people's challenges, tears, struggles, pains. But if that's what it takes, I'll do it, right? And you all can do that too, right? Not necessarily in sharing my story, but in sort of sharing what you've learned here. So allyship doesn't begin by coming here, it begins when you leave here. And when you go out into the world and you have those conversations that are difficult. If you're not a trans person, if you're not a queer person, then you have probably slightly more energy than me or another trans or queer person to have these conversations, because they're not actually attacking your very existence. They're attacking somebody parallel maybe to you, but that's a privilege, and I want you to use that. And everybody has privileges in lots of different ways, and you need to capitalize the ones you have and use them for, I think, standing up for people that don't have the same privileges. I think it's also really important to recognize that when we say allyship to trans community, we don't always mean to take the mic and speak for us. We often mean to find the mic and then give it to us, right? Pass the mic to somebody. And the mic can be lots of different things. And that comes back to the privileges you all have. If you have connections with certain people, if you have different, I don't know, places where you do have power, use that, right? And then give some of it to people who need that platform. There's so many different ways to affect change. And I think figuring out what you can do, that's something that is actually a skill you have, is so much more important than looking at sort of like these sort of, I don't know, the biggest thing you possibly can do, and actually finding what can you do uniquely. Because allyship takes all hands, and not just like the massive things that are sexy and look great online.
And in addition to that, when you think about allyship, it is not sitting behind a keyboard. Like we appreciate you sharing posts that are uplifting about trans lives, but we live beyond the keyboard. And so it's finding out how your local legislation representatives feel about trans issues and trans rights. Because if they're not aligned with your rights, then it's time for them to go. And that's the same thing with providing that education to your friends and family when you're talking about trans issues. Talk about where they live and the laws where they live, because that's how we affect change. Despite what you may hear or may see recently in the news, I truly believe that our votes do matter if they're counted right. And so I just urge people to look beyond social media and also donate. There's a lot of trans organizations across this country that do not have the proper funding. Transgender Emergency Fund is one of them. We are struggling to keep the doors open because we are the only agency in New England that is providing rental assistance, homeless intervention, hormone replacement therapy co-payments to the transgender community across Massachusetts and beyond. And if you don't have the funds to donate, volunteer. There's organizations like Transgender Emergency Fund, Trans Resistance, Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition, who needs volunteers to help us get our mission across. And so it takes some of those steps to be taken before you can consider yourself an ally.
Yeah, I think I want to echo the voting part. You might think that it doesn't really impact rock, but it does, because the difference between the public advocacy under the current administration at the UN, for example, and the previous administration is very big. So having the US support LGBT plus rights internationally, having people like Jessica Stern, who's the current special envoy on queer rights, makes a huge difference. In fact, she has helped us stop 2 anti-LGBT plus bills in Iraq. If that happened under Trump, where there was no special envoy, we would not have had that opportunity, and thus there would have been a law criminalizing queer identities. The other thing, especially for those of you who are going to be working in the international community, just recognize that LGBT plus rights are not negotiable. It's not one other item on the agenda, and we should, use it as a compromise because there are more women facing violence, gender-based violence, so we need to advocate for that, and sometimes you have to compromise. Either you advocate for human rights or you're not advocating for human rights. You can't separate LGBT plus rights, women's rights, sex worker rights, etc., from each other, because not only because they're intersectional, because they're actually identical. We all have the exact same rights and responsibilities. So by selecting who deserves the current priority status in a negotiation, you are basically picking and choosing. You're applying human privileges, not human rights. So just making sure that when negotiations are taking place, LGBT plus rights shouldn't be the priority. They should be a part of the priority, which is human rights. and shouldn't always be the topic that's being sacrificed, which sadly is often the situation, unless something huge is happening, like when the Islamic State was operating in Iraq. Recognizing that this is not a negotiable point for us in Iraq, where most, if not all, of our advocacy actually relies on the international community, is the difference between being able to put meaningful pressure or not. And if people are not going to put that pressure internationally, let us know so we don't come to you. Just, save us time and energy. Like you all said, the energy is limited and the fight is huge. So if you think this is not a priority, save us the time and the energy. But if you're taking it on, then do it.
Yeah, go.
Sorry, I have one more thing to say. When we talk about allyship and using the power that you have, think about where we are right now at Harvard University, prestige. So you should be using that allyship to speak to whoever it is, whoever your contact is at Harvard, to make sure that Harvard is putting their money where their mouth is too. I'm happy to be here providing education on this panel. I'm happy to have been here many times throughout this year for different events. But how about we start giving education back to those less fortunate? How about some scholarships being created for the transgender and LGBT communities? So we have to start thinking about that too. Education is power, and we need to give that back to the less fortunate.
Yeah,
I mean, I can talk about this. I wish I could
Yeah,
have more.
Well, I know you have the lane changer,
Oh, I could add that.
and I think you should add that because I think you're doing some really amazing work on social media to really capture a whole audience around these issues.
Yeah, well, I want to echo first what Amir said. The intersectionality is a hot topic word these days, right? Oh, it's intersectional. Multiple problems are existing in one person. Yes, that's true. Except that it also is true that they are the same issue. And I just really wanted to highlight that. I think that we don't always understand where these issues come from. But the reason I was trying to say that the anti-trans rhetoric is about everybody who's not a white cishet rich man is because it's truly that, right? This is the patriarchy and white supremacy that had a baby and said, great, let's oppress everybody who's not a white cishet man. And if we don't recognize that, then we're not understanding that it's not, like you said, I love your line, it was like, that's human privilege, not human rights. And I think it's so important that we recognize that. So if any of you care about anybody who isn't a white cishet man, and I hope to God that you care about somebody who's not a white cishet man, then you also, right, should care about every single one of these issues. And I think that's really, really important to recognize how it was something that took me a long time to understand because I also grew up in this very racist, very white supremacist, very sexist, misogynistic, transphobic world. I didn't understand how aligned these were. And it took me time. I'll just be very transparent with you all in my own allyship journey to my own trans community. What does it mean to actually find how diverse the community is and how important all these issues are because they're coming from the same problem, right? They're coming from the same oppressive system. And I think when we get that, there's actually so much more power that this work can have. So what Ian helpfully prompted me to talk about, so the work that I do online is all about trying to dispel these myths. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I think that many of you probably have noticed about anti-trans, anti-women, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, go on, right? Rhetoric is that it's very powerful and it's very sticky and it's propaganda, right? That's why. And it's designed to do that at the expense of the truth. It's trying to get the information out to whoever will take it. And because of that, it's very effective. Like I said earlier, sort of evil genius kind of effective. And the problem with the truth is it's not always that sticky. It's not always that simple. And it's that therefore not as easy to disseminate. And so what I've tried to do is how do I help the truth look as much like propaganda as possible? And what I mean by that is how does it make the truth as effective as propaganda is? And it's hard. It's really hard to do that. But that's sort of what my goal is online as an educator is I want to present the truth to people in the most digestible, easy to understand, and simple to then take and give to other people as possible. And so I created Lane Changer, which is I can give you all information about it later, but it's Lane Changer like Game Changer, but lanes because of swimming, because I'm a swimmer. But Lane Changer is an online learning series trying to bring gender literacy to anyone anywhere. It's an online program that you can access through just going to lanechanger.com, and you can buy an individual license or a company or a group license. Harvard really should buy it, but I'm really having trouble with getting them to do so. So if you want to use your privilege and power to get them to do so, that would be great. But in any case, it's designed to bring all these sort of simple conversations about trans people to you and to anybody anywhere. Most people don't know how to define the word transgender. Most people think that they have never met a trans person. If you've never met a trans person, you can't define the word transgender. How come everybody is talking about us? Right? And how are we supposed to have effective, kind, respectful, productive conversations if you can't even define the word you're talking about? Pretty difficult to do, right? So Lane Changers aim to bring that education to anybody, anywhere. And this sounds like an ad, it kind of is, but it's also for you all to take that and go elsewhere, because more people need to know this, right? More people need to have these conversations, need to be able to start at least with the basic terminology. And you don't even have the word in Iraq. Most people here don't even know the word anyways, even though we have it. So I think it's about really starting at the baseline that we can to move from there, and sort of dispel all the myths that have been like encrusted around what a trans person is. So that's Lane Changer.
Yes, that was a great pitch. No, that was great. Yeah.